Hi, everyone, and welcome to Building SaaS on AWS, the flagship show about building SaaS on AWS. My name is Gunnar Grosch. I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and if you're building or planning to build a SaaS product, this is the show for you. So what we do here on this show is we talk about SaaS-specific topics, dive deep into them so you can learn more about building SaaS on AWS. And this week, I am super excited to be joined by Isha, Sharma, and Ryan C. from Dremio. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
Great to have you both. And we always do the quick round of introductions, of course. So, Isha, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I'm Isha. I've been at Dremio for a couple years and leading up the cloud efforts on the product team here.
I'm Ryan. I'm an engineering manager here at Dremio, working on Dremio Cloud specifically now. I'm really excited to be here.
Great to have you both on the show. And if you're a recurring viewer of the show, you know that this show is about interactivity. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, just pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those throughout the show. And this week, we're going to talk about Open Data Lakehouse with Dremio. So super excited about this topic. So I think to get there, let's start with Dremio. So tell us, what is Dremio?
Yeah, so Dremio is basically the easy and open data lakehouse platform that allows users to get to their insights within minutes, and also provides them the flexibility to not only use Dremio's SQL query engine, but also other best-of-breed engines when they're doing their analytics.
And then you mentioned, and in the title as well, Open Data Lakehouse. So what is an Open Data Lakehouse?
Yeah, so there's I guess, two parts to this, right? The data lakehouse aspect and then the open part of it. So a little bit of a history lesson, right? Traditionally with analytics, the primary kind of method or option has been your data warehouse. But that, as the volumes of data have grown, as data democratization and providing access to tons and tons of users, because companies want to be data driven, right? All of that has come into play. The amount of complexity that's arisen around data warehouses and pipelines, and just the cost that comes up, right? When you're storing all your data there, that's really become an issue. And then that's kind of where the data lake concept came from, right? Like cheap and easy, put as much data as you want in there. But then that introduces another problem, it being, all right, well, performance isn't that great directly on a data lake, and you really don't have the same capabilities that you did in the data warehouse in terms of operationally being able to, add or update or, do any of that on the data lake. And so hence emerges the concept of a lakehouse, where you do keep your data in your data lake, you maintain that cost effectiveness, but you also get the flexibility of having those operations that you did on a data warehouse, so that you can actually maintain and work with your data on the spot. And then the open part of this is really based on open standards, open source, and it's the concept of keeping your data in open format. There's no lock-in in terms of proprietary formats where, if something changes, this industry and this space changes so quickly, and you always want to make your architecture somewhat future-proof, right? Being able to adapt to what's coming next, and a lot of the new technologies that come in, right? You don't want to be stuck in, well, I have my data in this format and I'm using this engine, and now it's going to take us 2 years to get off of it. So combining the open aspect with Lakehouse really means that you keep your data in an open format, and that also provides you, what I said earlier, the ability to use the best in breed analytics or processing engines based on your use case.
And I'd say we've heard this for many, many years now, that customers are creating and basically, well, they are creating more and more data in every company out there. So maybe you can give us some examples of how customers are leveraging these capabilities that you mentioned.
Absolutely, yeah. So the primary use case, or a lot of the times when the customers are coming to us, they're talking about, well, I have a ton of operational data, or I have I want to run the business, right? I have an app that I want to use Dremio for that's exposed to their customers. How do you go about doing that? Because their data is in S3 or ADLS, and they're not seeing great performance. When that dashboard comes up, we've all done it and we've all seen it, right? Where you open up your dashboard and you're kind of hanging out for 5 minutes, you go get your cup of coffee and hope that it loaded. And it's not fun, and it's not effective most of the time.
Yeah.
And so that's where Dremio really comes in. Data is essentially its own tier, right? With several different layers of it. So you keep your data in your S3 bucket. When you have table format like Apache Iceberg, that really enhances your capabilities when you're operating on that data. And then Dremio as the SQL query engine, along with the ability for us to accelerate those queries using data reflections, that ultimately makes that dashboard come in within seconds rather than the 15, 20 minutes that it was spinning for before.
Right. So before we dive deeper into this, I just want to do a shout out to Don Vito Codes in the chat, who's asking if this is live or pre-recorded. And Don, it is definitely live. I know that I've forced both Ryan and Isha to wake up super early today to get here. They are not based in the same time zone as I am, so I'm happy that they were able to wake up and join us this morning. Maybe that's why it might seem recorded, but we'll get Ryan and Isha to wake up throughout this hour for sure. All right. So if you have any questions, other comments, just pop them in the chat. All right, Isha, then tell us more about the services that Dremio then provides. I know, for instance, about Dremio Cloud, but tell us a bit more about what that is.
Yeah, so earlier this year in March, we've launched Dremio Cloud. Dremio's always had some presence with AWS, right? You can go to AWS Marketplace, you can spin up Dremio that way, but ultimately, data teams are trying to solve a problem, and that's not maintaining their infrastructure. That's not standing up an engine and keeping it going. And that's definitely not trying to figure out how much compute resources they need to keep their business running and their queries running. And so because of that, we figured, managed services is really the way to go for a lot of our customers, so that they can focus on the problems that they're trying to solve when we're managing the just maintaining the infrastructure for Dremio, as well as providing them the capability to set up their compute or their engines to scale up and down as their workloads are coming in. So that was really the driving factor behind Dremio Cloud.
Right. And well, the name of the show suggests that we're talking about SaaS, and that's definitely what you're describing there, Isha. And
well, first and foremost, we wanted to be on the show, so we had to do Dremio Cloud.
Right. No, that's what everyone is doing. To get on the show, they need to build a SaaS product. So thank you for that, Dremio. No, jokes aside, we're going to dive into what Dremio is more on a technical basis, of course, as well. The regular viewers know that this is what we're all about on this show. All right, so maybe it's time to do that then. We're 9 minutes into the show. Should we maybe dive into the technical architecture?
Yeah, definitely.
So Ryan, let's dive into it.
Okay, awesome. Let's definitely get started. So let's take a look at the architecture diagram for Dremio Cloud. We're going to focus primarily on the AWS components related to Dremio Cloud. There are some components that are hosted outside of AWS, but as you can see, there's already plenty to talk about just on the AWS portion. I'll start by walking through some of the AWS technologies that we leverage to streamline the deployment of Dremio Cloud in our customers' environment. Later on, I'll get a chance to talk a little bit more in detail about some parts, but let's kind of start with a high-level overview. Starting on the left-hand side, we have here Dremio's AWS account. Here for IAM access and roles, we use temporary security credentials and web identity federation. This allows us to access roles within our account from an external Kubernetes cluster. Then if we follow the arrow from the two, we go over to our customer AWS account. From here, we have created some additional roles in the customer AWS account, which we are then able to assume role into. Here we have a trust relationship set up with an external ID, and it allows the Dremio AWS account to basically assume role when we pass that external ID through. We use this role actually to dynamically spin up instances, and depending on query load, we'll basically spin instances up and down to respond to that query load. Now, if we kind of go back up here, we have this CloudFormation S3 bucket. This CloudFormation S3 bucket contains the CFT templates that we want our customers to run in their AWS account. Here, this CloudFormation template is unique to each run. So there's additional kind of sign-up related data that we store within the CloudFormation template. When you run the CloudFormation template, it creates a stack in AWS. The stack has a number of kind of checkpoints, I guess you could call them, which if you follow the number 3, kind of feeds into this SNS topic here. What that allows Dremio to do is that when we're doing the onboarding process and the user is running that CFT, we'll be able to display kind of progress through Dremio Cloud. So when you're in that interface and you're seeing, oh, I hit that button to launch Stack now, customers can then go from their from the Dremio UI and see that, hey, we're progressing through the stack. Either we started the stack already and the process of deploying the resources has begun, or the stack is now done, and now the rest of the Dremio process is now finishing up so that I can get started with my new project. So that's kind of the usage of this. The SNS topic up here talks with an SQS queue. The SQS queue is where Dremio Cloud from our Dremio control plane actually picks up that message that's coming from the CloudFormation template. And then that allows us to be able to power that UI. I'll get a chance to kind of show you how that portion works, and you'll get a chance to see how Dremio kind of shows that information from the UI later on.
So there's a question from the chat. Let me just bring that up. From Nothing is Impossible. I love that screen name, by the way. So Dremio assumed role in their customer's AWS account to spring EC2. Do you spin up EC2 instances in the customer account?
Yeah, so that's something that we definitely do. So I'll get a chance to kind of go over how that actually works. But basically, we do use that assumed role to basically spin up these instances dynamically. So if a customer has, a whole bunch of queries kind of running all at the same time, and we need more engines and replicas to be running in order to fulfill the load that we're seeing, Dremio will then go in and be able to spin up those instances and likewise spin them back down after the user has finished the queries. So it's very dynamic. It'll respond to the query load that the users are generating on the system. And it kind of keeps the cost low when no one's using it, and it will spin up and be responsive when users want to get that query done immediately.
Right.
To kind of keep going through this architecture diagram, the CloudFormation stack kind of creates a number of resources within the customer VPC. The VPC is existing already. We support the customer using their existing VPC, existing subnets within the VPC. So there's not really that sense of like, oh, I need to establish a an independent VPC specifically for Dremio Cloud. We actually really want to be in your existing VPC where your data is already kind of present. So things like an RDS source potentially. That's something that we would definitely want to talk with, and putting in a separate VPC makes it super complicated for our end users. So Dremio Cloud is really designed to be put into an existing VPC and be able to live in parallel with your rest of your data sources. So here with this VPC here, we can see that we have kind of two security groups that we create. One is this private link security group. The private link security group really is a way for Dremio Cloud to talk back to the Dremio Cloud control plane. What it consists of is basically a VPC endpoint, and the VPC endpoint is kind of expressed as ENIs within the customer account. And depending on how many subnets the user selected, if they want to have, subnets in different availability zones, for example, they might have selected, 2, 3 different availability zones, which correspond with 1 or 2 ENIs as a result. And that's actually what Dremio uses to connect back to the Dremio Cloud control plane. And if we follow the route that it takes, we'll see that the VPC endpoint goes to this number 7 here, which jumps back up to this Dremio AWS account. The Dremio AWS account up here has this number 7, which leads to a network load balancer. And the network load balancer then leads to some EC2 instances. And the EC2 instances are how they're able to send data back into the Dremio control plane.
For customers that are using multiple AWS accounts, which is a very common pattern, does it just scale that way? So you would then have multiple accounts looking the same way as what we're seeing on screen right now?
Yeah, I definitely. So accounts generally would basically add one or more kind of these engine security groups and potentially a separate private link security group, depending on whether or not they want to use private link. By default, our CloudFormation does set up that private link for you. But if you're a customer who maybe is a little more advanced, feels like, maybe I don't want that private link, or it's just something that doesn't fit what my architecture looks like today, you actually don't necessarily need the private link. The private link is actually something that we support in addition, but it's not a strict requirement. So maybe it'll look a little bit different without the private link security group. But for the most part, there's always this engine security group. Maybe the RDS sits outside it, and then you just have kind of the rules in the security group set up so that you can talk to that instance rather than having it in the same security group. But for the most part, customers would see generally the shape of the setup.
Yeah, and also to your point about multiple AWS accounts, like that tends to happen even amongst like teams across a single company, right? And so what we do allow you to do is we have pretty much, we call it a cloud object, and that's what holds kind of all of this information on the Dremio side. And so if you create multiple cloud objects, you can associate them with your different projects and have multiple AWS accounts accessible that way.
Another question from the chat before we move along. I suppose it's about the typical Dremio customers, if they are fully in the cloud or if you see customers being hybrid.
Yeah, so we've traditionally been, on-prem. And so a lot of our customers are right in the middle of that journey where they're starting to say like, yeah, this looks interesting. I want to be in the cloud. So for us, it's usually either or. We've got the option I was mentioning earlier where you can spin up Dremio from the AWS marketplace. We have customers solely on that. So I would say that they're entirely in the cloud. And then we've got others that deploy Dremio on, say, Kubernetes. So usually one or the other rather than hybrid.
Right.
Okay, let me kind of continue a little bit more through this architecture diagram. There's a couple more interesting pieces that I can kind of talk about. So I think the last thing I covered was this private link. So this private link security group kind of has that trust relationship with the engine security group that allows these instances here to kind of talk with the ENIs that have been created for that private link. Additionally, there's a couple other things that the instances actually talk to. One is this Dremio project S3 Bucket. This is created as part of that CloudFormation template that I talked about. This is where Dremio stores some of its own data related to this project. So something like reflections, for example, is something that we'll store here in this bucket. There's also occasionally, customer data, right, where they really want to run the queries and actually be able to look at their own data. And that's where these customer data S3 buckets kind of come into play. It might be 1, it might be 10, just really depends on the customer and how they've structured their data. Then finally, there's this last bucket where we see this number 6, and this points to this Diagnostics S3 bucket here in the Dremio AWS account. I'm not going to go too much into detail about this just yet. I'll kind of save that for later on, but we do have this Diagnostics S3 bucket that I'll talk about later, which is also something that the instances may potentially write to. They don't really read much from this bucket or at all, but it does potentially push data into this bucket. And I'll kind of show how Dremio has kind of leveraged this kind of technology to give us some additional tooling and capabilities to help customers out as they're launching Dremio Cloud.
That was it. Pretty straightforward. No, I love seeing this. Very cool stuff, Ryan. So if you just joined us, this is Building SaaS on AWS, and I'm happy to be joined today by Ryan and Isha from Dremio, and we are looking at how they are building SaaS on AWS. So maybe, Ryan, it's time to have a bit more of a look at Dremio to see maybe the onboarding process.
Yeah, definitely. Let me jump over to Dremio Cloud here. So let's maybe head over to the sign up page. So users can definitely sign up for Dremio themselves by going to dremio.com and just hitting that get started button. This is what that page will eventually lead you to. I myself am just going to use Google since I have my corporate Google set up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and use that.
Is that a swordfish or?
He's a narwhal.
No.
A narwhal, of course, a narwhal.
Yeah, that's a narwhal.
Yeah.
I think earlier there was a question in the chat asking if, regular folks, students, people who aren't, part of a giant organization can use Dremio. Yeah, Dremio has multiple ways of like community editions that you can use, one being standalone Docker image. And then even with Dremio Cloud, there is a free edition that free forever that you can use.
That's great. Sorry for hiding you every time I bring up a question, by the way, Isha.
Let's try this one more time. It might be that Google's just not cooperating with me this morning. Doesn't want to let me in. May need to sign up by email instead.
It, along with us, hasn't woken up yet.
Well, and this is all to prove to Don Vito Codes that this is live. This is live demo.
Yep. If it wasn't live, we would have cut this out already. But nope, sure. We're doing it live. So let's see if Google wants to let me set up my account this morning.
Fingers crossed.
Meanwhile, I think there's a question in the chat maybe that we can.
Maybe we can bring up Ganesh, one of our regular viewers here on the AWS Twitch channel. Maybe Isha, you can talk a bit about this, how to get started, if you have any getting started tutorials or guides.
Yeah, absolutely. So docs.dremio.com, pretty straightforward. We've got a ton of documentation, but one primarily being how to get started with Dremio Cloud, and it walks you through any nuances or the explanations around, similar to what Ryan's doing today, explaining all of the roles we ask you to create and why. And then along with that, there's a guide that pretty much in 3 or 4 steps tells you how to get to your first query with Dremio.
That's great. And we have our friend Bill with us as well, showing his age. This is not TV, Bill. TV is out. This is streaming. But yes, we are definitely live.
Okay, well, apparently it didn't want to use Google this morning, but our email sign up still works. So definitely use that instead at the moment. But let's kind of quickly get started and get the show moving. So This is your kind of like step 2, I guess, in this setup. And that's really just kind of setting up the basic information about your organization and the project that you want to create. So let's just do not TV organization, because why not? And then we'll just use the first project as the name of my project. And then let's go ahead and click next.
So what is a project? Can you just...
Yeah, so a project is a construct that we have in Dremio Cloud to be able to isolate not only your data, but also your workloads. In case you have multiple teams, multiple use cases in the same account, we want you to be able to provide access to whoever needs whatever, and really face the problem of if the data science team is running a bunch of really heavy workloads on the engines, they shouldn't be running into the dashboarding and making sure that continues to have the compute that it needs. So our projects isolate your sources, therefore your data, as well as your compute.
So I guess let me kind of now go over that CloudFormation template that we kind of talked about very briefly in the architecture diagram. So when we get to step 3, it's really about setting up those resources in the customer AWS account to be able to use Dremio Cloud. So if I go ahead and click this launch CloudFormation template, that will take me to the EC2 console where I have this quick create stack page. Let's just quickly go through this, not TV or demo. So this is that place where we kind of talked about the existing VPC and the existing subnet. So here we can just click the existing VPC that I have in this region. And now it's asking me for the subnets that I want to launch in. Well, let's say that I feel like launching in these 2 subnets. So I have them selected now. This is that project store that I talked about in the diagram. If we look back here, is this Dremio project S3 bucket that we have. We ask the customer to basically choose the name of the bucket. Usually we provide like a default suggested one, but sometimes an organization has specific naming requirements, how they want buckets structured in their org to be relative to other teams and other projects that they've been working on. So that's kind of why we give the customer the option of saying, hey, I want to name it some specific way. There's also kind of the encryption requirements with S3 buckets. Our customers are particularly sensitive about, hey, I can't be creating a bucket without encryption. So we also offer that option to basically specify that encryption type. Finally, at the bottom here, we have to create roles, as I kind of alluded to in the diagram. So I got to acknowledge, hey, I'm gonna go do that now, and then we're gonna go ahead and create stack. Actually, before I do that, let me kind of quickly jump back to that Dremio UI to kind of show what that looks like. So here, this is what that Dremio UI that I mentioned with kind of the progression of the stack, right? So before we run the stack, obviously we don't have really much information about, hey, has the customer started the stack yet? So we're here kind of in this kind of like waiting for us to hit that create stack button. Now, if I were to go back over here and I go ahead and hit that create stack button, now it's gonna kind of get started. We can see some of the events that happen. And this is that Dremio CFT begin, which is that the resource that actually calls on that SNS topic. So if we kind of quickly refresh, we'll see that we actually already finished the SNS topic portion. And if I were to go back over to the Dremio UI, we'll see that it's already progressed to this creating AWS resources section. And we didn't really touch anything other than that create stack button. So if we look over at the architecture diagram, what happened kind of in the background is the stack launched, the stack called upon this custom resource that we introduced in the CloudFormation template. That basically triggers this SNS topic here, which provides the message to the SQS queue. And then the Dremio control plane picks it up from the SQS queue and then is now able to show that status in the UI to say, hey, we're now creating the AWS resources. Now, some of these resources take a little bit of time to create. A lot of them are pretty straightforward, but one of the ones that takes a little bit are kind of like the instance profile that we use for our EC2 instances. So given that, let me let this run for a little bit, but also kind of talk a little bit more about Dremio and show a little bit of something else. I realize I set this up in a way that doesn't let me just switch to another organization because it's in the middle of creating one. So again, this is live, so I now need to open a different tab, and this is going to be a little bit of a painful thing for a second because I haven't optimized for this. Let me try to get myself signed in and see if Google wants to let me in this way. Oh, yay, it let me in. Okay, I'm gonna need to switch my screen share for a moment.
I think we've more than proved that this is very much live.
Yeah, I think it's done.
I'm gonna share a different screen. Let's see. Let's go ahead and go over to this other screen. If you could make that visible for folks.
Yeah.
Let me just kind of resize this a little bit for
There
myself.
We go. Perfect for branding.
Oh yeah, that too. I've recently learned. So let's say that we finished that CloudFormation process. We don't want to, bore the viewers at home and be like, okay, well, we're gonna sit here for a couple minutes there to watch that go. So I have this kind of set up already. This is Dremio. Once you kind of finish that process of onboarding, we have the main Dremio project screen here. I have this demo project kind of set up. We have the sample source that we provide our users to kind of quickly get started without even setting up their own source. They can already kind of start using Dremio and start getting the benefits of Dremio and understanding how that works. So in this case, I have the sample bucket kind of all set up. I have a whole bunch of data in this bucket that's set up. We can see that we have all of these different tables that are here. And now what we can do is we can kind of take a look at how we leverage kind of engines and spinning up engines dynamically depending on kind of query load. So here, if I go over to project settings and we kind of take a look at this engines page, we'll see that I have this kind of preview engine set up. And this preview engine right now has that one replica for very fast queries to kind of immediately be able to be available. But let's say that I have a whole bunch of queries now. So here we can see that we have this one instance so far. And what I'll do now is I'm going to quickly go over to another screen and generate a whole bunch of traffic. So what that does is that it'll just submit a whole bunch of queries to the system and go, hey, I now have suddenly, let's say, 50 queries running. We now need to potentially spin up additional instances. We can see that the system definitely reacted. It doesn't like the fact that I'm pushing so many queries all to the same engine. So the system will kind of detect the fact that, hey, look, you have a whole bunch of queries that are kind of pending here. Let's maybe consider spinning up additional engine replicas to basically respond to that load. So it does take a second to kind of respond. We don't want to kind of rapidly spin things up if there's just like a very small little blip. But now we see. So now we can see that that query load there triggered the system to go, hey, I think the number of replicas that we need is actually higher. So what it does is that it will start spinning up that instance dynamically. So if we go over to the events, we'll see, hey, wow, okay, so we actually not only had one scale-up event, but we actually had two, where we said, okay, actually, not even just one additional instance is needed. We actually need two additional instances to try to respond to that query load. And it'll adhere to this max replica setup here. So if there is that high load, but we still set that max replica, the user kind of is able to kind of predict, hey, I'm not going to suddenly be like 1,000 nodes and I'm going to blow my AWS budget out of the water tomorrow when I had a whole bunch of user queries. So we do allow the user to kind of set that so that they have a better idea of, hey, how much actual usage can I predict potentially to be my max. So this is where we're at, where we have these two additional instances, and basically the queries will kind of run through these two additional nodes as well. And what will happen eventually is when all of these queries are kind of done, the system will basically say, hey, actually, we're actually seeing kind of less queries than the number of instances that we need to respond to that query load. And we'll actually see kind of these like scale down events that happen as a result. So that will kind of push down the number of instances back to that min replica state, where the user is now saving the money of, hey, I don't need 5, 10 EC2 instances running all in my account right now. And that gives them that dynamic kind of responsiveness of, sometimes I have more queries, sometimes I have less. I will create the number of instances to fulfill the queries and keep my end users who are using Dremio happy with how responsive the system is. But at the same time, I don't want to have that huge bill at the end of the month to be like, oh, well, we ran 1,000 instances for a month at a time, and now I'm sad for the rest of the year because I now got to tell my boss that I need more instances.
It handles the case where you spun up additional instances. In the past, a workload's coming. You got really excited. You brought all of those EC2 instances up, and then you forgot to bring them down when your workload was kind of up. So automatically being able to scale up and down on our end, it really takes a little bit of that, again, management away from our customers so that they can actually worry about the problems they need to worry about rather than blowing their budgets.
Can we see what's happening behind the scenes, or am I pushing the limits of your tab and demo capabilities?
Yes,
Ryan?
Let's try doing that. So I do want to show a little bit of stuff in the AWS console. So I'm gonna need to switch tabs again. So we're gonna stop sharing my screen one more time and go back to that last window where I had more things set up than not. So let's go back over here. For a quick second, I'll also mention the project completed. I didn't touch this window, but because of that CFT process and the fact that we notify our system when the CFT completes, it automatically transitioned to this page. So I couldn't show you the ending of this process because it was automatic. Everything just kind of pushed to the next page, and now I'm already in my first project.
This is
So-
the not TV organization, just to clarify, right?
Yes, this is that not TV organization here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it fully
Builds
set up
project.
itself, and it was I didn't even get a chance to show you, but that's that SNS and SQS kind of working in tandem with the CloudFormation to make it so that it's really easy for our end users.
Look at this, Ryan.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So let's kind of go over to the AWS console to try. Oh, yeah. Okay, fine. As I expected. Okay. Oh, okay. I refreshed and it's still
Magic.
here. Okay. Okay, magic. I'm back in. And this is that not TV but TV where I made that magically happen. But here's my AWS console, as everybody is kind of most likely familiar with this show. So these are those instances that we had that were scaling up and down in response to that query load. There are 4 because there's that 3 from that other project, the not TV, or my main project here that I had, and then there's that 1 from the not TV organization that I created. So these are the 4 instances that we kind of expect.
Could I, if this was my AWS account, can I see that somehow? Some tags or something that tells me where they belong?
Yeah, so there are tags that are actually associated with each of these instances. So we can see like the project name that's associated with it, the engine that's associated with it, and there's also this Dremio managed tag, which actually helps us identify all the instances that are associated with Dremio. And we actually use permissioning around this Dremio managed tag so that users feel comfortable with the idea that, hey, instances might be created or deleted by Dremio, but the instances will only ever be created and deleted that are managed by this Dremio _managed tag. So users don't have that kind of like, oh, what if Dremio is going to shut down some instances that I'm running that aren't related to Dremio? And that will never happen. And you can kind of see that in our IAM policies that we deploy. We have that kind of very strictly guarded to say, hey, if you're going to do that terminate instance command, it has to have that Dremio managed tag. And in fact, if you take away that tag, if I were to manually go into the system and go, okay, you know what, I'm going to take away this Dremio managed tag, it would not work anymore. And Dremio won't be able to shut down that instance, actually. So don't do that, or else you're going to have the bill at the end of the month.
And you can add your own custom tags. We know that a lot of companies, a lot of departments have their own way that they want to tag and identify between different teams and things like that. So you can do your own custom tags.
Yeah, great point.
The scaling events that we saw in Dremio, are they using auto scaling or something like that in AWS, or is that fully managed by Dremio, adding, removing instances?
That part's fully managed by Dremio in terms of adding and removing instances. That part is kind of the secret sauce, I guess, of Dremio and how we have the system kind of respond to that query load. So yeah, that part is definitely managed by Dremio today. Now, I guess, I mean, here we saw that it was very easy and very straightforward. My networking, my security groups, everything is set up really nicely here, right? And we saw how, the scale up, scale down work perfectly. And that's kind of because we designed it that way. And I kind of set up this AWS account in a way that I know will work for this demo. But sometimes, and I'll say sometimes, there's some kind of challenges that we face with how customers set up their AWS VPC and subnets. Maybe they have kind of more complex networking where the routes kind of go to an on-prem data center maybe, and then there's an additional set of firewall rules there that we now need to navigate. And being able to kind of debug those scenarios, especially in a customer environment, is really important. So I'm going to kind of take us through some of the kind of debugging and diagnostic tooling that we've actually built around Dremio Cloud to make that really easy for our customers to kind of collaborate with us in a way of like, hey, I'm seeing these instances that are created, but I'm not seeing them in Dremio Cloud. What's happening? Do you have any advice for me in terms of how to navigate around that? So let me kind of try to do this basically live here and show off some of those tools that we have. So let's take one of these instances. Maybe let's see if I can find the one that's been running the longest. We have this one here, I guess. So here in the EC2 console, I think everybody's familiar with what this looks like. One of the things that we leverage here is this monitor and troubleshoot section. And we have this get system log here. So let me go ahead and click that. Now, this get system log is basically that boot log of that instance, right? So it gives us information about the services that started up and maybe some additional error codes. Well, Dremio actually leveraged this a little bit more, and we actually built some custom kind of tooling that's actually run as part of each instance's boot time. So we have this kind of script here called Diagnostics.sh. And what Diagnostics.sh does is it tries to do a bunch of kind of the basic networking kind of calls out to Dremio Cloud, out to S3, and sees if it has that basic connectivity and basic DNS kind of setup. So what we've done here is that we made it very easy for our users to either look at it themselves. If they know what they're looking at, they can look at the kind of output themselves. But we also wanted to make it so that we can have our support team kind of ask the user, hey, you're seeing some problems. Let's have you kind of give us this log, and we will go and give you maybe some advice or some suggestions in terms of what you might do to resolve the problem. So what we have here is you can either copy log or download log. In this case, I'm just going to copy it so that it's easy enough for me. And then I'm going to go over to this kind of custom tool that we've built. And I'm going to go ahead and reset this diagnostic input, and I'm going to paste in the entirety of the log. So if I kind of expand this out, we'll see that it's like the entire boot log, everything. But there's also this kind of section here called diagnostic data blob that we put into this log. And this is actually what powers this diagnostics viewer that we have here, which gives us kind of a JSON representation of the same diagnostic data that we ran. So if we look here, we can see that the FQDN of the instance, how the DNS resolvers are set up, the gateway address that we sent to the instance and what it's going to try to connect to. There's also stuff like the IP address of the endpoint that we're connecting to. We'll see a quick curl command against it. So then we can take a look at things like TLS. Maybe they didn't use that AWS private link setup, and they decided to use their corporate firewall. And we can maybe see, hey, there's that corporate firewall in the middle of our network connection. Could you maybe turn that off? Could you, get around it or make an exception for Dremio Cloud? And that's kind of the information that we can glean from that. So this is just some kind of samples of that. Now, I'm going to kind of quickly go over a little bit more about this diagnostic blob and some of the kind of interesting challenges that came along with it. So if we kind of look through this diagnostic blob, there's usually like a base64 encoded string, which I think folks are kind of familiar with, I think. If we look at it, the weird thing about it is there are these weird kind of dates in the middle. And that kind of typically kind of throws things off, right? Like base64 shouldn't have these random dates in them. And what we actually had to do, and one of the interesting things is the fact that the diagnostic blob is this large meant that the system was automatically kind of adding in timestamps as it was printing this diagnostic blob out into the console. So what we actually had to do is write some regex expressions here to basically go, okay, well, let's go ahead and strip out all of these date objects first, and then try to detect the base64 diagnostic blob that we have, and then decode it. Well, in our case, we also compressed it. So we actually decompress it and then decode it to be able to get this kind of diagnostic output out. So that was actually some of the kind of unexpected kind of twists in this story, is that we really expected that when we were going to print it out, we can just directly read it. But it turns out, just from the sheer size of the amount of data that we need and what the diagnostic information that we want to get out of it, we needed to be able to kind of deal with some kind of the quirks of how large this data is and what it means for customers when they just send us this blob. We wanted our support team to not need to go, okay, let me go in and manually delete each one of these dates from the thing and then reparse the whole thing. So this thing just, you paste the entire system login and it will go find that blob for you so that we're not asking the customer, hey, give me like 3 minutes. I need to go in and delete some stuff and extract out the log to be able to look at that. So we make that really fast for our support users and also just basically our end users as a result, so that they're happy with the experience. Now, one other thing that I'll talk about that I think I can only use the diagram to really talk about is this Diagnostics S3 Bucket, which is the last kind of tool that I want to kind of cover in this series. So the Diagnostics S3 Bucket is a bucket that we use to kind of push our Dremio service logs up, really during that initial kind of startup phase of an instance. And the idea behind it is sometimes there is that firewall still. We might be able to get kind of basic connectivity back to the Dremio Cloud gateway, but sometimes there's that extra quirk where we're actually trying to communicate with Dremio Cloud, but then we're hitting some weird issues where, there's some kind of configuration mismatch and the instance isn't able to authenticate back to Dremio Cloud. And those kind of issues, since we have kind of a very black box kind of design with our instances that are running in our customer account, we need to be able to see that log. And actually, let me touch upon that very quickly. The whole idea of how these instances operate is that we don't really want our customers to need to have SSH or SSM access to the instance to kind of give us that same information that we would need to be able to debug and diagnose the issue. So what we've actually done here is we have this Diagnostics S3 Bucket. And what we do is we actually create a signed URL as part of our process here. So when that instance starts up in the customer account, we pass in a S3 signed URL that our instances that are running in the customer account can then go, okay, well, in the first kind of 10 minutes of my startup sequence, we can basically post the Dremio service log back up to the S3 bucket and make it so that if there's some issue that we're seeing where instances are kind of connected but also not able to run as an instance for Dremio Cloud, what we'll do is that we can then go into our own S3 bucket and go, okay, let's take a look at those logs. Let's ask maybe, let's take a look if it's something simple that we know about, that we can tell the customer how to deal with it, then we'll give them the quick solution. Otherwise, engineering can also kind of leverage these same logs to go, okay, this is kind of a special edge case that we need to deal with now. Let's take a look at what that looks like and why that's happening in our system. So we have this kind of Diagnostics S3 bucket to make that easy for us and make it easy for the customer to be able to go, okay, I didn't need to log into the instance to go find that log for you guys. It's kind of automatically done. So I think this is actually really cool of a system, so that we don't have to ask the users who sometimes might not be as comfortable with how all of the AWS technologies don't really want to do the whole okay, please set up CloudWatch and get us the information that way. We want to make it so that customers don't need to add on services that they don't traditionally use already. Outside of EC2, because, now we need EC2. But just in the sense that, we don't want to tell the customer, hey, yeah, just because you're using Dremio, you now need to use CloudWatch in order for us to get that diagnostic.
Right. So you're able to shift off some of that operational burden. basically.
Right. And I think that's something that we really pride ourselves on, is that we don't want our end users to need to set up those extra things just to make Dremio work, right? So being able to do diagnostics and getting the user kind of onboarded here is really important to us, and being able to get those details that we need without asking the user to do a whole bunch of work is what we want. So that's kind of the special sauce again, in a way, but not so special, since it's just it ultimately is an S3 bucket with a signed URL, but it lets us kind of push those logs up even before we have all of the instance basically fully set up.
But it's special sauce, just maybe not so secret sauce, because you've told everyone about it now. So.
Yep, not so secret anymore. It's special, but not secret.
So we are quickly approaching top of the hour, and removing your screen share is my cue to let us all know that it's about to end. But I have a question from the chat I'd like to bring on from C. Fregley. And I think this goes to the multi-tenant part of Dremio. So did you build all of this org workspace code yourself, or did you start out with some SaaS native framework or reference architecture?
So it was all built internally at Dremio. So a lot of this stuff that you saw here is just hand built by engineers here at Dremio, working to solve these kind of problems for our end users.
I think the base of it was the existing Dremio product. That's really where we started, and that's what gave us the head start. Is we had a good foundation. We just had to SaaSify it.
Yeah, and you have. Cool. So then, before wrapping up, how do customers get started using Dremio?
Yeah, so it's as simple as going to dremio.com and pressing the giant Get Started button up on the right there, and that'll take you to our sign up page for Dremio Cloud. And it's exactly the way Ryan showed it to you. You can, most of the time you can use Google. It's just this morning special, but Google and Microsoft and GitHub social logins, or you can create, a local account with your email. And there's a free edition that, you're not paying for Dremio. Of course, your EC2 instances still incur cost, but we don't charge you for the product itself. And then as use cases come on and things get complicated, then there's always Dremio Enterprise, where we're here for you. Either way, even on the free edition, we've got a really great community where you can ask questions and we can help you out. That's how you get started. And docs.dremio.com is the point of all the tutorials and guides. So that's also a really great resource.
All right. So with that, thank you very much, Ryan, Isha, for being with us this very early morning, for you at least. And I also want to thank everyone watching. I've seen in the chat, we've got people from the UK, from Turkey, from Costa Rica, Guatemala, from all over the world, basically, watching us today. So thank you all for joining. And with that was Building SaaS on AWS. Today, I've been joined by Ryan and Isha from Dremio. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.